The horse wouldn't move. Maverick stood there in the Arizona heat, muscles trembling, refusing every command I gave. 12 years I'd owned that ranch. 12 years I'd trusted my own judgment above everything else. And here was this animal, this creature I'd raised from a colt, telling me I was wrong. The canyons stretched east, jagged and endless, and he wanted to go there. Somewhere out in that maze of rock and heat, something was wrong. Every instinct I had screamed to ignore him, to stick to the plan, to stay in control. But his eyes held something I couldn't dismiss. Desperation, urgency. Like someone's life depended on whether I'd finally learned to trust something other than myself. Wyatt had owned the ranch for 12 years, carved out of the red dirt and sagebrush 40 miles southeast of Tuba City. The land stretched wide and unforgiving under the Arizona sun, bordered on the east by towering sandstone cliffs that marked the edge of Navajo Nation land. At 53, he'd learned to read the desert the way some men read books. Every shift in wind, every cloud formation, every animal track told a story. His horse, Maverick, was a 7-year-old chestnut quarter horse with a white blaze down his face and more sense than most people Wyatt knew. They'd spent nearly every day together since Wyatt had bought him as a 2-year-old from a breeder in Flagstaff. The horse knew Wyatt's moods before Wyatt did, could anticipate commands before they were given, understood the rhythm of ranch work like it was coded into his DNA. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Wyatt rose before dawn, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and headed to the stable. The September air still carried summer's heat, though the nights had started to cool. He'd planned to ride out to the northeast pasture to check the fence line where coyotes had been testing the wire. Routine work, simple work. But when he saddled Maverick, the horse's ears kept swiveling east, toward the canyon system that cut through the landscape like jagged scars. The animal shifted his weight, muscles tense beneath the saddle, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Wyatt knew that posture. Something was wrong. "Easy, boy," Wyatt murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "Just a fence check. Nothing fancy." He swung into the saddle, but Maverick refused to move toward the pasture. Instead, the horse turned east, toward the canyons, taking 2 steps before Wyatt pulled the reins. Maverick tossed his head, snorting with frustration. This wasn't like him. The horse was trained, disciplined, responsive. But right now he was fighting every command. For 20 minutes, Wyatt wrestled with his horse. Every attempt to ride toward the pasture was met with resistance. Maverick would sidestep, back up, or simply plant his hooves and refuse to move. The animal's agitation grew with each passing minute. Sweat darkened his coat despite the morning cool. His breathing came harder, faster. Whatever he sensed, it was urgent. Wyatt sat back in the saddle, frustration giving way to something else. Doubt. In 12 years of ranching alone, he'd learned to trust his own judgment above all else. After his wife died from cancer 8 years ago, self-reliance had become his religion. He made decisions based on logic, experience, and careful planning. Trusting a horse's unexplained behavior went against everything he'd built his life on. But Maverick wasn't just any horse. They'd survived a flash flood together 3 years back when Wyatt had ignored the animal's warning to leave a dry wash. Maverick had saved them both by bolting against commands, just as the wall of water came roaring down the canyon. Wyatt still carried the scar on his shoulder from where he'd been thrown against rocks, but they'd survived because the horse had trusted his instincts over human authority. "All right," Wyatt said finally, loosening the reins. "Show me." Maverick moved immediately, breaking into a steady trot toward the canyon system. The terrain grew rougher as they left the ranch property, rocky soil giving way to slick rock and scattered juniper. The sun climbed higher, turning the sandstone cliffs into walls of fire. Wyatt's shirt stuck to his back with sweat. They'd been riding for nearly 40 minutes, moving deeper into country that was technically reservation land, though the boundaries out here were more suggestion than law. The canyon Maverick chose was narrow, barely wide enough for horse and rider. Walls rose 60 feet on either side, casting deep shadows that offered brief relief from the heat. The horse picked his way carefully over loose rock, never hesitating, ears forward like he was tracking something specific. Wyatt's hand drifted to the rifle in his saddle scabbard, though he couldn't say what threat he expected. Then Maverick stopped at a bend in the canyon, whinnied loudly, and refused to go farther. Wyatt dismounted, legs stiff from the ride. The horse kept staring at something around the corner, stamping one hoof urgently. Wyatt pulled the rifle, moved forward cautiously, and then he saw her. She was crumpled at the base of the cliff wall, half hidden by a boulder that had probably broken her fall. A woman, maybe 30 years old, with long dark hair matted with blood. Her left leg bent at an angle that made Wyatt's stomach turn. She wore hiking clothes, good boots, cargo pants, a torn technical shirt. A small day pack lay 10 feet away, scattered contents suggesting she'd fallen from somewhere high up. "Hey!" Wyatt dropped to his knees beside her, fingers finding the pulse point on her neck. Weak but steady. She was alive. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. "Help," she whispered. The word came out cracked and desperate. "Fell yesterday." Yesterday. She'd been out here for at least 24 hours in Arizona heat. Wyatt did a quick assessment. The leg was definitely broken, probably compound, from the way the bone pressed against skin. Her left wrist was swollen, possibly fractured. Abrasions covered her arms and face, but the real danger was dehydration and shock. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, skin hot and dry to the touch. He ran back to Maverick, grabbed his water canteen and the emergency medical kit he always carried. The horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding the situation's gravity. Wyatt helped the woman drink, supporting her head, letting her take small sips. "My name's Wyatt," he said, working to sound calm. "I'm going to get you out of here. What's your name?" "Naomi," she managed between sips. "Naomi Begay. I was hiking alone. Stupid. Tried to photograph eagles. Slipped. Well, Naomi Begay, your stupid mistake just got interrupted by my horse's good sense." Wyatt splintered her leg with branches and medical tape, trying to ignore her barely suppressed screams. Her wrist got the same treatment. "This is going to hurt like hell, but I need to get you on my horse." The next hour was brutal. Getting Naomi onto Maverick's back while she faded in and out of consciousness took every ounce of Wyatt's strength and all of the horse's patience. Maverick stood like a statue as Wyatt lifted her, positioned her, then climbed up behind to hold her steady. The ride back to the ranch was agonizingly slow, Wyatt whispering encouragement to both woman and horse, praying she wouldn't slip into full shock before they made it. The emergency room doctor in Tuba City confirmed what Wyatt already knew: compound fracture of the tibia, broken wrist, severe dehydration, and a mild concussion. Another 6 hours, and Naomi might not have made it. They kept her for 3 days, pumping fluids and antibiotics, setting bones, and monitoring for complications. Wyatt visited every day, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Responsibility, maybe, or curiosity about the woman his horse had somehow sensed from miles away. On the 4th day, they released her with a walking boot, wrist brace, and strict instructions to stay off her feet for 6 weeks. She had family on the reservation near Kayenta, but her mother was in Albuquerque caring for a sick relative, and her father worked long-haul trucking. Naomi lived alone in Flagstaff, an hour and a half south, and had no one to help with recovery. "Stay at the ranch," Wyatt heard himself offer. He'd come to pick her up, expecting to drive her to Flagstaff. "Got a spare room? You shouldn't be alone climbing stairs with that leg." Naomi studied him with dark, intelligent eyes. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "My horse knew you needed help. Figure I should trust his judgment." She smiled for the first time since he'd found her. "Okay, but I'm cooking once this wrist heals." The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Naomi recovered in the spare room while Wyatt worked the ranch. They ate dinner together, talked on the porch in the evenings as the desert cooled. She was a wildlife photographer for a conservation group, traveling constantly, chasing shots of endangered species. She'd grown up on the reservation, left for college at Northern Arizona University, never quite felt like she fit in either world anymore. "I spend my life trusting my gut about animals," she said one evening, watching Maverick graze in the pasture. "Where they'll be, what they'll do, when to move closer or back off. But I ignored every instinct that told me not to climb that rock face alone. Thought I knew better, thought I could control the situation." Wyatt leaned against the porch railing. "That's why Maverick came to find you. Knew you'd forgotten how to listen to what your instincts were screaming. And you almost didn't listen to his. Almost. 12 years alone teaches you to trust yourself above everything else. Makes you forget that sometimes the best wisdom comes from something that can't even talk." 6 weeks passed faster than Wyatt expected. Naomi's leg healed, her wrist regained mobility, and the bruises faded to yellow ghosts. She'd insisted on helping despite his protests, cooking meals, organizing his chaotic office, even managing to feed the chickens with her walking boot. The ranch felt different with her there, alive in a way it hadn't been since his wife died. Not romantic exactly, but something deeper, like two people who'd learned the same hard lesson from different teachers. The morning she was set to leave, they walked out to the pasture together. Maverick trotted over immediately, and Naomi produced a carrot from her pocket. The horse took it gently, then pressed his nose against her shoulder in what looked exactly like a hug. "He saved my life," she said softly. "How do you thank a horse for that? You don't. You just remember what he taught you." Wyatt stroked Maverick's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath warm hide. "I spent 8 years thinking I had to control everything, trust only my own judgment. Took this stubborn animal refusing to listen for me to remember that wisdom doesn't just come from experience. Sometimes it comes from instinct. From trusting the bond you've built with another living thing, even when you don't understand why." Naomi nodded slowly. "I've been living out of a suitcase for 5 years. Always moving, never trusting anyone enough to stay. Always thinking I had to see everything from every angle before I could trust my own judgment. But you let me stay in your house, trusted that I wouldn't take advantage. And Maverick somehow knew I was dying in that canyon before any human logic could have figured it out." "So what now?" Wyatt asked. She was quiet for a long moment, hand resting on Maverick's neck. "I've been offered a position with a wildlife program based in Flagstaff, documenting species in northern Arizona. I'd be local instead of traveling. I've been afraid to take it because it meant staying in one place, trusting that I wouldn't get bored or feel trapped. But maybe it's time I start trusting my instincts again, instead of overthinking everything." "And what are your instincts telling you? That this is where I'm supposed to be, that there's something about this desert, this land, that I'm meant to document, and," she smiled, "that I should visit a certain ranch sometimes. Make sure you're listening to your horse." Wyatt felt something in his chest loosen, some knot he'd been carrying for years. Maverick would like that, so would I. They stood in the morning sun, 3 beings bound by an experience that had taught them all the same truth. The deepest wisdom doesn't come from controlling every variable or refusing to need anyone. It comes from trusting the instincts of those you've bonded with, whether they have 2 legs or 4, from believing that sometimes the best decision is to stop thinking and start listening to what your gut, or your horse, has been trying to tell you all along. Maverick whinnied softly, tossing his head as if agreeing. Wyatt laughed, and for the first time in 8 years, the sound didn't feel out of place in the desert silence. It felt exactly right.